Our special guest today, Sharife Gacel, she is local to Central Florida, is a practicing mental health counselor, as an analog astronaut and a solar system ambassador for NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory. She served as medical officer on the Lokai High mission at the High Seas Habitat in Hawaii. Her ongoing research is on the impact of crew isolation and lunar simulation on human behavior. So please join me in welcoming Sharife Gacel.
Can everyone hear me in the back? You're good? Awesome. Well, like Jocelyn said, my name is Sharife Gacel, and I am a licensed mental health counselor, have a telehealth private practice based out of Orlando here locally, and I have been in private practice for going on almost 11 years now. I am also a NASA JPL Solar System Ambassador and an analog astronaut. And with this presentation, you're going to get to learn what all that means. It's a lot of acronyms, space loves abbreviations and acronyms, so we'll get there. But the focus of a lot of my work is basically exploring space and inspiring Earth. So I take what I do within the realms of space and I impact Earth with what we can do, what we can learn from space, and then bring it back to Earth. So we're going to also talk, so you can see some cool pictures of some of my analog astronaut mission, and there's a cool picture inside in front of the habitat, and that's one of my crewmates in front of the habitat at night. All right, so where are you from? Just kind of, you can either shout it out or whatever. Everyone's an adult here, so it's not like kids rushing to the front or anything. So, California? Okay, where else? Earth, okay. DC. All right, DC.
Indiana.
Okay. Cool, awesome. All right, so we're going to come back to that question at the end, so keep that in mind. So, like Jocelyn said, what NASA JPL Solar System Ambassador is, it's a program that people are selected and trained by NASA and the Jet Propulsion Laboratory to go out and talk in the communities about what it is that NASA has going on with different space missions and human space flight, and that's kind of my particular focus is the human space flight component of it. We are a volunteer program, and also an analog astronaut. So, who has heard of what an analog astronaut is? Okay, 1, 2, awesome. Well, this is going to be exciting. So an analog astronaut, it is, that's why you're here. So analog astronaut is basically somebody that goes out, a researcher that goes out and simulates what it's like to live and work in space. And with my focus as a therapist and my background in psychology, went out as an analog astronaut researcher psychologist and studied crew dynamics. So my own personal background, my first degree is in molecular biology, microbiology. Second degree is in psychology. I went to veterinary school, and then I have my master's in clinical mental health counseling. So I'm kind of all over the place with education. All right, so we're going to get some terminology, because I might use some abbreviations, so I want to get that out of the way first. Like I said, analog astronaut, we're researchers. We go out to different habitats all over the world and simulate what it's like to live and work in space. And analog astronauts live in a hab, or a habitat. I'm going to say hab like 20 million times. So this is an example of a hab in Antarctica on McMurdo Station. And this is an example of a hab in High Seas, Hawaii, which is where I was stationed, where I was at, and I did my mission. And this is an example of a hab it's underwater, about 60 feet underwater off the coast of Key Largo. And so they're habs that are in all different kinds of situations, and you can see they're mostly in extreme environments, similar to what it would be like, what you would need to live in space. And had to throw in a picture of my mentor, Nicole Stott. She helped me with some of the projects that we'll talk about in a little bit, but more about her in a minute. So another abbreviation, EVA, stands for extravehicular activity. I'm going to mention EVAs and the EVAs that we did, and also the overview effect, so OE, and we'll get to that towards the end. Okay? All right, so what is an analog astronaut? We are not a clock. I get that a lot. Like, are you digital or any analog? I am not a clock. I am a human, and I am not space flown yet. Hopefully that would be changing soon. And so we have not experienced microgravity, but the analog astronaut part, so analogous astronaut, we do a lot of the similarities of what it would be like to be in space itself. So we are not superhuman. This is the cool thing about being an analog, is that anyone can apply. Every habitat has a little bit different requirements and stuff, and actually it's kind of cool because one of the presentations that I did about analog astronauts, somebody in the audience was there, talked to me about it after, applied to be an analog astronaut, and is actually going on a mission, which is the coolest thing ever. It's like, people I can talk to actually going and continuing their own work. So what an analog astronaut is, we are analogous. And this is a map all over the world of some of the habitats, of some of the habs that are all over the world. There are more of them, but this is just kind of a sprinkling of some of them. And we simulate long-duration spaceflight missions. So my particular mission was 2 weeks long, but there are some that you might be familiar with NASA has starting that is up to a year long, and so they can be anywhere in between any of those missions. So the primary focus of an analog mission is research. And if you basically put together a research project and you apply to the whatever habitat that you want to be doing your research on, and if they select you for the crew, it's something that they'd be interested in having your research on the mission, then you get assigned a mission and you go off on your mission. All right, up here is the Hera HAB, and that's the one that's at Johnson Space Center in Houston. So this is one of the NASA ones. NASA has a couple of them, and that's one of them. So the HAB that I was at, like I said, it was on the big island of Hawaii. Right here with the red star that's where the HAB actually was. So we were stationed on the side of the Mauna Loa volcano, and one of the most active volcanoes, if not the most active volcano in the world. And our mission was at 8,200 feet. So the volcano itself, from the base of it to the summit of it, is actually taller than Everest. So most of it is underwater, but we were at elevation about 8,200 feet. Had a really cool view of Mauna Kea, which some of you might be familiar with, where some of the observatories are. There's huge observatories on the top of Mauna Kea, and so we had great views outside of the habitat window of that. Notice I said window, not plural. All right, so our mission was simulating what it would be like to live on the moon. Some of them would be simulating what it would be like to live on Mars. They're all a little bit different, but ours was a lunar simulation, although there could be some overlap with them. All right, so the dome, sweet dome where we lived in, for size comparison, right, it seems like it's 1,200 square foot dome, and that sounds spacious and big and everything, but it's actually 2 floors, and there's only about 288 square feet of usable space, so that's really not that much for 6 people total. This was the home to 5 successful NASA missions, habitat missions, and NASA was the one who originally started and built this habitat many moons ago, and it's since been passed on to private. Fun fact, the owner of this habitat and of the property is Hank Rogers, who is the founder of Tetris. So, just fun. We got to meet him at some point. Everything is obviously off the grid, so there's nothing out there. It's like that's Mauna Kea right there. And I can move over here so you guys can see. Mauna Kea over here, and this is on the side of Mauna Loa. We have some solar panels and a Starlink panel, which you can't really see. It's right there, that little thing. And so that's it. There are 2 floors, and I'll give you a tour in a minute of it. But you kind of go in this little airlock in here. There's some offices and stuff down here. We each had our own little desk, and then upstairs were the bedrooms, and there were 2 bathrooms and all that. All right, so here's the tour. You walk inside the airlock, and we have our spacesuits on the right-hand side, the blue things. And then we also had a space helmet and a backpack. All right, so it was all we would have to wear before going out on the EVAs. We would have to wear a spacesuit because that would be part of the simulation, part of the sim. And kind of like you can't do in space, you can't just walk outside into space. That's not good for you. So in here, you have to put on a spacesuit, and every time you go in and out, it has to be scheduled with mission control, and everything has to be planned. You have to have a focus and everything before going out on your mission. All right, so in the helmets were kind of like this one that I have here in the model, and I'll get to her a little bit later on. Motorcycle helmets, and they were adapted to have air cooling through it. They had comms that were inserted in them, and also lights. And it was a full face helmet. We weren't allowed to obviously open up the top because that would be breaking sim and bad for space health. And our suits, we had to wear knee pads and elbow pads and everything, hiking boots, because it was on a volcano and very, very sharp on there. All right, so these are a couple of our desks here. There were 6 of them total. Picture of the lab where we did some of our research, and some of my own research was in there. And then the stairs leading up to the different dorms, the little rooms. All right, and then we have the exercise bike with the 1 window. So the habitat had one window, and that was it. It was very light because it was, you could see the sunlight, but there was only one window. And that was our connection to the outside world. We were about an hour's drive from the nearest army base, which would be the nearest point of contact or connection with the outside world. So in order to get selected, you had to be in pretty good physical shape and no health issues or anything. In case anything happened, we did have a doctor on call outside of the habitat and everything, just in case of emergencies. But that was our window to the outside world. We had pancake day. All of the food that we ate was dehydrated, and I'll get to more of that in a minute. But this was one of the highlights. About halfway in the mission, we were eating dehydrated foods, and then we got to eat pancakes, and that was a big morale booster. So pancake day will make a comeback. So hold on. The kitchen area, a little TV that we had, and then more of the kitchen and the refrigerator. As I said, the first missions were NASA missions, and the habitat had this camouflage covering tarp over it, and with wind and with everything, the weather and stuff, the tarp eventually got blown off and degraded and stuff and degraded, and so it went away, leaving it as the white beacon on the side of the volcano that it is. A lot of it, the purpose of the camouflage was so that it would blend into the volcano, not being kind of an eyesore on the Hawaiian landscape. It's very small though, so you can't really even see it when you're driving by it unless you know it's there. Okay, so this is me. Very happy doing my little volcano dance. And going out here, it looks Martian even though it was a lunar mission, whatever, we're gonna pretend. All of this was just volcano, and there's different kinds of lava. So there's this kind of lava that's called the A'a lava, and this kind of lava, which is called the Pahoehoe lava. I am by no means a volcanologist or a geologist or speak Hawaiian, so bear with me. Behind me, right here, is a lava tube that goes down to the depths of Mordor. And you want to stay very clear and be very careful where you walk on this. All right, actually, I'm going to go back here. So right here, we would remember with the lava, the A'a lava, one of the ways to remember it, you don't want to walk on that one. It's very brittle, it cools very quickly, and so when you walk on it, it's like walking on very sharp razor blade marbles. Not good. Hence the hiking boots and elbow pads and knee pads and everything. One of the cool ways of remembering the A'a lava is, do you walk on it? So you remember it. And the Pahoehoe lava was the one that you could walk on. It was a little bit slower cooling. Slower, could be 50 years, 500 years, whatever. Safer to walk on. So why is a HAB chosen? All right, so there are a bunch of different reasons why a HAB is chosen. The main one is that it's isolated. And again, it's going to simulate what it's like to live and work in space, and being very far away from other humans and from anything else. Something breaks, you can't just go to Home Depot and fix it. You have to figure it out with what you have on the HAB, and stuff broke. So we'll get to that in a second too. Simulates geography that's on the terrain. There are volcano tubes that were obviously on the volcano, and there are also volcano tubes on the moon. And there's different volcano tubes, potentially on Mars, and that could be something where humans would eventually be able to live in the volcano tubes to protect from radiation and different meteorites and any kind of anything hitting the surface. There's also crew dynamics. We're a bunch of strangers we had never met, and we met a couple times over Zoom, and then we flew out to Hawaii and met for the first time in the airport. Take 6 strangers. Based on, we don't really know much about each other. We're each kind of assigned a role, a mission, and then you go, you see what happens. And that was my job. It was the fun part of seeing crew dynamics and how to make people get along, basically as best as you can, and what happens when some of the creature comforts are removed. You also have supply availability. Like I said, there's no Home Depot on the moon. When stuff breaks, you figure it out, usually with duct tape. All right, so question, is this the Earth, Moon, or Mars? What do you think? Earth, okay. Okay. What about this one? Mars, Hawaii, okay. How about this one? All right, I have a nice mix. Okay, cool. So,
It wasn't nighttime, isn't the sky too dark for the Earth?
yeah, so I changed the backgrounds to trick everyone, and it seems like I did a little bit. So this is actually the moon. This was actually the moon, and I edited them all just Photoshop. I didn't edit the terrain or anything to make them all similar, but that's the moon. That is Mars, and that is the volcano tube to Mordor, one of them on Hawaii. And so you can see how the similarities between the different terrains, why things are chosen because of that. Alrighty, so I said lava tubes. This is a picture of the lava tube and going in it. So they would go climb down into it and then explore on the bottom. The pictures on the top are kind of aerial views of the moon. And they're lava tubes that are actually on the moon looking down into them. And that's how we know that there's evidence of them, because you can actually see them. And they're made a lot of similar, same material, volcanic glass, silica, a lot of the same materials as all, 3 different locations. Have a cool picture here, one of my crewmates inside of the volcano tube, and you can see how big and how massive they actually are. This one was actually nicknamed the Cathedral for obvious reasons. It looks, massive. So we have kind of different stages of where we're at and why we're doing some analogs. How many of you saw the Artemis 1 mission, the SLS launch a couple years ago? Okay, a couple of you. Okay, cool. A few of you. Awesome. So after the Artemis 1 to see if the rocket would work, Artemis 2 is going to go ahead and go back to the moon. And the scheduling on it is a little bit up in the air still, but they're aiming for next year's right now, and that's going to take astronauts to orbit the moon. Artemis 3 is going to have the first astronauts back landing on the surface of the moon, and then also the creation of Gateway. So I'm not going to get too much into this, but Gateway will be kind of an International Space Station type hub on orbit around the moon. That comes next. And then we have the human landing system. After Gateway, then we have the humans, all the different orbiters, all the landers that are currently being developed with SpaceX and with Blue Origin and all the other space companies. And then finally a base camp on the moon. All right, and so part of what the analogs simulate is the last step. Have to figure out what happens before we can ever have people in long duration living on the moon or Mars. So this is the crew. I'm going to take you through a little bit of my research and kind of what it is that I studied. We were a crew of 6. This is chief scientist. He's from Belgium, American vice commander, American communications officer, chief engineer, also American. Belgian is the commander, and then me, the medical officer. The reason why I mention that is because the international component of it. It's going to be space is an international thing, so we have to learn to work with people from different backgrounds, different age ranges, everything from all walks of life in order to make it work. And we all took different strengths that we had. And as I said, my background is in molecular biology, microbiology originally, and the chief scientist, he's a microbiologist. So we kind of pull on each other's strengths and different things. So he needed help with some petri dishes and culturing things. I'd jump in and kind of help him as his second. And, the commander, I worked with the commander closely with kind of figuring out what crew dynamics would look like, what's normal, if anybody had any concerns. So we all played on one another's different strengths. The name of our mission was Lokahi, which means unity in Hawaiian. And so the mission, the whole mission name was the EMMIHS 23 Lokahi mission. So it stands for Euro Moon Mars International Moon Base Alliance 23 for 2023, because I went last October, 23. And then the Lokahi mission. All right, so I'm actually still close friends with a few of these guys. They're fantastic. He's a flight controller right now at Johnson Space Center. I was there for the eclipse a couple weeks ago, met up with him and had the commander staying with me last week at my house. And, so it's neat. Whatever happened over the last 2-week mission, it worked. It was neat to still be friends with them. So crew selection. Gonna go on a little bit of as far as like what you have the analog astronaut, you have astronauts, and then you have Earth. Kind of the whole exploring space and inspiring Earth thing. So we have crew selection. The astronauts have to have a master's degree in STEM, the minimum. You would be citizen of whatever, NASA, you'd be US citizen. With ESA, you'd be European, et cetera. And so medical and psychological tests, less than 1% are selected to be astronauts. This was the second to last, 2 classes ago that was selected. Analog astronauts, our focus is research. You can come from all different walks of life. You can be artists, you can be scientists, you can be engineers, you can be writers, photographers, anything. As long as it's with a focus and some kind of a research project, you can apply to be an analog. So we obviously have to be physically healthy and psychologically healthy. One of our first kind of icebreakers. So we get to the airport. One of the days that we arrived at the airport, we all met there. And then the next day they were like, all right, we're going to do, a group activity and, wake up and meet at like 7 a.m., 6 a.m., something like that, outside of the ranch where we were staying overnight. So, okay, I'm like, pack a lunch if you want. I'm like, okay, we're going to be out that long, cool. Bring a lot of water, cool, okay. Wear hiking boots, okay. And so we climbed a mountain. And that was the morning exercise to see how we would work together before ever meeting, like really meeting each other, to see, okay, if you can do this on a mountain, who are the leaders, who are the ones that, that might have something, who are, figuring out crew dynamics to then mimic that on the mission. All right, and then Earthlings, how do you select your crew? It's a metaphor. Who do you keep in your life that works, and who is healthy, who keeps you healthy? This is where my therapist hat comes on, of who are your social contacts and your strengths, your people in your life, right? Who do you select for your crew? So each crewmate brought a unique, like 1 or 2 experiments each. I had one primary, which was the psychology experiment, and this fantastic specimen to my right is the secondary experiment. More on her later. So we had different, every morning as like the medical director, I did medical checks with all the crew, and my background in veterinary medicine, not that, whatever. People are animals too. And so, I did medical checks on people, and I logged everything, make sure everyone was happy and healthy, and kind of just did a quick mental health check, make sure everyone was sleeping well, who wasn't, who was, if anyone was having any panic attacks or anything, that we were all okay. And the final research of mine was called The Impact of Crew Isolation and Lunar Simulation on Human Behavior. What all that means is that I simulated what it was like to live and work in space, again, long duration, and taking things that we all need to survive. So food, you have hygiene, and just different parts of it, job satisfaction, fun, social components. And when you remove some of those things, what's left? What happens to people? So said we had dehydrated food. What happens when you remove your creature comfort food? Any cravings, and you're stuck with dehydrated, green peppers for 2 weeks. Like, you okay? How you doing? So this was one of the experiments for my friend John. He was doing for Artemis, testing some of the hardware for Artemis, and similar to what they had actually done on Apollo on the moon, they're doing an updated version for Artemis. These are some of the microbes, some of the petri dishes that were they're grown there. And then Pero, he simulated what it was like motion sensor, what it would be like to have like a pet or an animal. He would react to different lights, to different, touch. You could scratch him on the head and he would make noises and whatever. All right, so I basically did a pre-test, post-test, quasi-experimental design. That means that I gave a bunch of assessments ahead of time in the beginning, sat with every one of the crewmates, and kind of assessed where they were at, kind of a baseline measure. On the back end, I did the same thing and just kind of checked what their outgoing measures were. Over each of the measures that I was studying, so I did that for food, hygiene, fun, social, sleep, and job satisfaction. Every day I would give them a basic needs assessment every day that they would fill out. And so that was part of the medical checks. They would go in, fill this out. It was on a Likert scale, 1 to 10. How satiated are you? 10 being I'm absolutely satiated, this is best day ever. 1 being, oh my God, this is not okay. And plotted them on just a scale. So this is an example of the job satisfaction one. You could see that over the 2-week mission how it was increasingly going down, and then what would potentially be impacting that. I put job satisfaction on there because that was the measure that was impacted the most. You would think like, oh, food or sleep or something. They decreased, with some of them. Some of the crews actually increased. And so one of the cool things that I was able to do with the research is actually leave some of these assessments in the habitat after I left. And I'm currently still measuring some of the measures from the missions and from the crews that have come after my mission. So I've been getting measurements, I'm getting data to increase my sample size since October. And so I have a bunch more data going in, looking for trends, looking for, all right, what changes within 1-week missions, 2-week missions, et cetera. Consistently, job satisfaction is the thing that drops the most. So I did kind of a forecasted projection of when job satisfaction would eventually reach 0. And it would take about 30 days where it would reach 0, which means that after about 30 days, if you're not doing something to keep the job satisfaction up, people's job satisfaction is going to be 0, which leads to burnout, exhaustion, depression, and that's where my mental health hat goes on, right? What do you do to prevent that? So a lot of the research was actually being published now with High Seas, with some of their articles and stuff, and I actually have been putting together a technical report for my own purposes and hopefully continuing more research. So my secondary experiment was the spacesuit art project. So I mentioned that one of my mentors is the astronaut Nicole Stott. She has a foundation called the Space for Art Foundation, and she creates spacesuits that look like these. Oops, that one's mine. That one. And they're basically children that are either sick or they're all over the world, and they create art of what space means to them, what exploration means to them. Each one of the spacesuits has a different focus, and so the kids will create art, and then the ILC Dover, who is the company that actually makes the actual spacesuits, sews them together and makes them into actual spacesuits that have flown on the International Space Station. So before I did this mission, I was collaborating with her. I'm like, what can we do that can incorporate art therapy and art and space? So she said, why don't you create an analog version, an analog astronaut version? Every day, I brought pieces of fabric that we put together, brought some paint and Sharpies and pens and everything, and every day the crew would create art. They would create a little swatch of art. At the end of the mission, took the pieces back, and with the help of my mom, we sewed it together into the Lokahi spacesuit. And so after, you're welcome to come up here and take a close look at it, look at all the patches, they're all, all around. There's about 3 different missions that have created art on this spacesuit, and a little bit more information about it and where you can find more information on that. So this is my secondary experiment. All right, so we have experiments, astronauts. The motto of one of the unofficial mottos of the International Space Station is off the Earth, for the Earth, and beyond. The International Space Station is a national laboratory, and it's basically with the focus of doing research and doing all different kinds of research and science. Analog astronauts, my own personal mission, exploring space, inspiring Earth, and the whole purpose of it is research, again, all right? So here, when you have a research project, you have kind of a mission, you have a purpose, a goal, something, a hypothesis, something that you're testing. Right? But we can bring that back to Earth of what is your purpose, what are your goals in your own personal life? What are you doing? What are you working towards? What are you passionate about? What are all these things? And putting the therapist hat on, these are things that I can bring into my practice and in speaking to help people kind of figure out, we have different focuses and different research focuses. What's yours? Food, now it gets fun. So we had a lot of brown food. We had dehydrated food that came in these. You might maybe recognize some of you from hurricane supply food or something like that. They're all these big giant tubs of just dehydrated foods. We had all vegetarian food for our mission. Some of the subsequent missions were not, but we did. Shelf life of these things is about 10 years. There was no fresh produce on our mission. And we also had no idea what recipes or anything. We did actually have one cookbook up here, Meals from Mars, that Dr. Cyan Proctor, who was on the first High Seas mission, wrote this book, left it in the habitat, and we were able to pull some of the recipes from it to create these magnificent brown meals. We were in Hawaii, so of course you had to make Hawaiian pizza. The tomato, I don't even know where it is. Right here, powder. We have tomato powder. So you take the tomato powder, you put some water in it, turns into a tomato paste, and then you take some flour and put it out or whatever, and put some tomato goop paste on it, put some rehydrated peppers in it, and we had some pineapple, so we rehydrated some pineapple. It was the most disgusting thing you've ever imagined. It's straight up tomato paste, and it was disgusting. Pancake day. And so then we had, what else? I've compartmentalized a lot of this. We had a lot of soup, a lot of broths, call it what you will, a lot of beans and noodles and stuff. And eventually it got old. And if you're familiar with the phrase with menu fatigue is it's genuinely a real thing. By the end of it, I don't care how hungry you are, you just do not want to eat. And so on average, we each lost about 10 pounds by the end of the mission. So, there we go. So astronauts have prepackaged food. Their dietary restrictions, everything is monitored with them a lot better. Their caloric intake, their nutritional values, they have blood tests regularly. But similarly, they have dehydrated foods that they rehydrate in space on the International Space Station now. And that's kind of what we were mimicking. What is it like? Right? Some of their favorite meals on the International Space Station is shrimp cocktail. Because it's spicy with the cocktail sauce in space. You don't really use kind of your taste buds because of microgravity. On here, we were testing out, all right, so you have group cohesion. How do you all come together and cook in one thing, in one meal, come up with creative ideas? Because none of us really had any idea. We got very creative during the mission. Figuring out meal times. The astronauts in the International Space Station have a combined mealtime, like they meet at the dinner table at 5 p.m. every day, and that's something that they do for group cohesion. And we had 2 out of the 3, we had all 3 meals together on the mission, and every 2 out of the 3 meals were prepared all in a group. So for us, mental health and food, very highly correlated. And again, kind of reminders, putting the therapist hat on. What are you doing to take care of yourself from a nutritional standpoint? Making sure that you're getting the nutrition you need so you can be the best version of yourself. Exercise on top of everything else and our dehydrated foods, we had 1 to 2 hours of exercise a day. And a lot of this was for kind of mental stimulation. It was also to simulate space. On the International Space Station, astronauts will have to work out. They'll work out about 2 hours a day to prevent muscle fatigue and bone loss and a whole host of other things. And so we had one window, as I said, and what I did was I got a little stationary bike and I faced it right towards the window. And then I would pretend that I was like cycling down the volcano towards Mauna Kea every day. And, it worked. So we also did a push-up challenge. I do not know why. Somebody started a push-up challenge. And so every day we would go, we weren't competing against each other. We were seeing like how many collective push-ups we could do as a team. And it was something that was neat because we would start out at like, my call sign was Echo. So I started out at 30. By the end of mission, I was like at 125 push-ups or something. We would just be walking and like, hey, okay, and then drop down and do push-ups in the middle of just conversation, and the other person would drop down. It's very, very creative. So the exercise, we would also do the EVAs, and those were about 1 hour to 2 hours long, and it was basically hiking at elevation with a spacesuit on a volcano, on top of the 1 to 2 hours of exercise every day. And out of like a horror film or something, I'm standing out here, just like, looking outside the window. All right, so as I said, astronauts, they have the hydraulic type of workout gear, workout stuff over here for bone density and muscle deterioration. Analogs for variation, this is kind of where you do everything. This is where we were working. This is where we were exercising. That was the window. The kitchen was here. Like everything, we were always together all the time over here. So on Earth, this is my little workout station at home. Why is exercise important? All right, we know that for mental health, we need to move. We need to be, active in some capacity. It helps us get outside when we're on Earth, and also getting endorphins, getting a whole bunch of different things, a bunch of different reasons. And so, therapist hat on. What do you do to keep yourself in the best physical shape you can within the realm of your life? So, sleeping. Each of we had rooms, this is like the Ritz as far as HABs go. Sometimes they have bunk beds, sometimes they have just, everyone sleeps in the same space. We had our own individual bedrooms, which is quite nice. We had 1 lamp, 2 outlets, obviously clean sheets, and a sleeping bag. The rooms were all angled, and they were about 5.5 feet at its widest and about 36 inches at its narrowest, so they were kind of like a triangle. If you imagine the narrowest, it's the width of a door. So you would have the door, and then it would open up a little bit to about 5.5 feet. I'm 5'4". If you're taller than 5'5", you're going to be sleeping in like fetal position. And some of the crewmates were like 6'4", and so you would hear them in the middle of the night like rolling over and like smashing one of the walls. It's like but sorry. But yeah, so you could see what the bedrooms actually looked like in here, and they were angled because you're in the top of a dome, so it's kind of angular. You kind of tuck in there. But these were our rooms in here. We each had one of those. In space, the astronauts get a little sleeping quarters about the size of a phone booth and with Velcro so they don't float around in the middle of sleep. They can kind of Velcro themselves into a sleeping bag. Some of the sleeping studies are actually sent back to Earth, and they can monitor for some of the mental health components. Some of the studies that are actually used for like sleep studies and sleep quality are sent back to Earth for like cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT type stuff for therapy. And then Earthlings, as you see my puppy Cosmos passed out here, he gets very good sleep. He's a greyhound. And he shows why it's very important to get good sleep and how sleep, therapist head on, it's important to have healthy, good, productive sleep on Earth. If not, it's going to come back and it's going to be harder to live a happy, healthy, and stress-free life. All right, so we had the lavatories. There were two lavatories. There were two bathrooms in the hab, and half of them worked. We weren't allowed to take a shower. We took one shower in the whole 2-week mission. And it was not as bad as you would think, because we were given baby wipes. Yeah, and kind of like in the space station, they don't have a running like shower. That wouldn't work in space. So they have sponge baths that they use, and so we simulated that with baby wipes. And so we were given as unlimited baby wipes that you wanted, and then we could take one shower on day 8, which was also Pancake Day. How cool is that, right? That was like, you should see the result of that. It's like flatlining going down, and then Pancake Day, and then it goes back down again. On the bottom, this is the bottom bathroom, have the shower that we weren't allowed to use, a compost toilet. Both of them were compost toilets. The fan on the downstairs one did not work, so it did not smell good in there. We finally figured out how to, neutralize some of it with vinegar and with a lot of Febreze. The lab was just around the corner from there. We also had one load of laundry that we could do for all of us. It was literally one load, everybody's laundry, and one load into the washer and dryer that were in the hab, and that was it. So, how did that affect, our mental health, right? So in space, as I said, meant to mimic, there's no sinks or showers, they take sponge baths. Space toilets use airflow and, nothing glamorous. This was the top floor bathroom that we had. We had limited water. Whatever water was in the start of the mission was the only water that we were allowed to use, and we had to check that every single day, make sure we weren't going to run out. Same thing with the power, right? Everything is solar power. We had to make sure that we couldn't run out of power or else we'd be in trouble with no power. Happened once very briefly. So my greyhound Anubis showing the importance of hygiene and how it can help mental health, right? It helps us feel better about ourselves, helps with confidence, helps with, kind of going out in public. It makes it nicer for other people that are around us in public, and that can very much tie into mental health. Social, space ballet. We had limited time to write family, and we couldn't go on social media. We didn't have any use to the internet unless something was whitelisted ahead of time. So if we used a website or something for research, we could have the mission control whitelist it, and then we could use it at that point. Aside from that, it was just one email a day, and then we had one 15-minute phone call back home on Pancake Day. So that was a cool day. And that was basically it. So we did have an awesome crew. We were a very animated crew, and so we had a lot of fun just kind of keeping each other on our toes, so to speak. With social aspect of it, astronauts, like I said, they meet for mealtime at 5 p.m. every day, make sure that they have group cohesion. They also have some weekend time. We did not have weekend time because it was just a 2-week mission, so we worked the full time. And our work day started similar to what the astronauts do. It started at 6:30 in the morning till about 10 p.m., give or take. And that was our 16-hour-ish work day. And then after that, we'd go to sleep, wake up, rinse, and repeat. Well, I guess not rinse because we didn't have anything to rinse, but we had 1 or 2 hours of fun or social time that was kind of scheduled into our day. So we would have like 1 hour free time, maybe after lunch or whenever, and then we would have also some time built in. So how do you keep yourself entertained, and what do you do for fun? Okay, so this is a picture that I took at one of the NASA socials for the Demo 1 launch, being able to connect with people that you have similar interests with. This would be a great example of that. This type of meeting as organization of doing that. Improving your well-being, your quality of life, and on and on. So job satisfaction, this is the one that took the biggest hit. We all had our personal experiments. Some of the experiments did not work. So one of the incubators was not working, so the microbiologist was on the struggle bus a little bit. And it it affected some of his work. He couldn't do the research that he wanted because the equipment wasn't actually working. So with the help of a couple other crewmates, we got the incubator working again, and then he was able to start his research. But for that time, he was kind of at the mercy of, it is what it is, helping other people. It was important to know our strengths and our weaknesses within one another, to know how we could jump in. Knowing the crew really well. This person is maybe stressed out today for something. How do we jump in and help them? And that can be something that can apply to us too. All right, so picture of culturing the lava, one of them, and our workspaces. Yeah, we each had, like I said, individual desks, and that's from the upstairs picture. Job satisfaction in space. Average workday is about 16 hours also. They do get weekends and enough time built in for sleep, and everything is monitored, making sure the astronauts are healthy and as happy as can be. So they do different satellite work outside of the ISS or medical experiments that they participate in. They do their own experiments for different private companies that are up there with analogs. Here's person for scale. Same thing, same kind of workday. We're trying to mimic what it's like being in space. And medical experiments, I would count as like the giver of medical experiments on this mission. And then Earthlings, what brings you job satisfaction? What fills you intellectually? What gives you a reason to get up in the morning to go and do something? Mental health hat on. What drives you to get up in the morning? Do you feel good? Do you feel excited to do your life, your activities? Are you exhausted? Do you need to rest? Are you feeling burned out? That sort of thing. All right, so for fun, crew time, we came together, we played card games. We had movie time. There were some things that were kind of built in to the TV that was there. Had some art time, as I said, creating the spacesuit art project, and then fixing random things around the habitat. That was kind of fun. My communications thing, the whole contraption broke. My air hose broke off, so I had fun fixing it with duct tape and getting all back together. Yeah, so fun looking back. What astronauts do for fun, they have fun looking back at Earth from space. So they'll sit in the cupola and they will take pictures. They'll play games with one another sometimes. They'll talk to family. Sometimes there are a bunch of instruments on the International Space Station. A lot of them play instruments. Similar type thing for us. This was before the mission started. Two of them decided it would be a good idea to do a handstand on lava. It was not a good idea. We had gloves for a reason. And then, Earthlings, a picture that I took of, I forgot which one that is. I think that was Mars 2020. Don't quote me on that. One of the rocket launch photos that I took, it's one of the things I do for fun. Right? So what do you do for fun? What keeps you excited and fun and mental health hat back on? So the future. I'm playing with some lunar gravity on here. The future, this is another one of the kind of measures that I did informally, seeing where it went. I was talking about the overview effect. So the overview effect, real briefly, is a concept that was described by space philosopher Frank White, who is a very cool man. Happens to be also one of my mentors, so it's just very cool. He was just noticing that astronauts that were flying in space at least once whenever they would come back to Earth would describe some kind of a shift. And they were describing a sense of awe and wonder when they looked back on Earth. Somehow we were all connected. There were no borders, no boundaries. We were one, and we were protected by a thin blue line, which is our atmosphere. Right? How cool for Earth Day. And this concept, it seemed to change a lot of the perspectives that the astronauts would have when they came back to Earth, hence there being a perspective shift. As a therapist, this is something, because one of the things I specialize in is life transitions. So moving from one phase of your life to another. Oftentimes, that means looking at your life in a new way. That means looking at yourself in a new way. Considering things that maybe you hadn't before. That's the overview effect on Earth in our own way. Right, so part of my work as a therapist is figuring out how can people explore their own sense of awe and wonder. It's measured on something of self-schema. So how do you view yourself operating through the world? How does that change throughout your life? Self-transcendence. So how do you connect with something bigger than you, not necessarily in a spiritual sense, but more of you're part of a community. You're part of something greater, part of a greater good type thing with self-transcendence. And then also measuring awe and wonder. What brings you awe? What brings you wonder that words sometimes can't even describe? And it takes musicians, it takes artists, writers to describe it because words just aren't enough. So when you look up, these are all pictures of, that I took out there. When you look up, think of what you're capable of. The people you want to surround yourself with, the people you want to inspire, and the limits you can push when you give yourself a chance to succeed. Remember our interconnectedness from outer space to a space simulation back to you. We're all from the planet Earth. So in the beginning I asked where you all were from. I heard one Earth. and that's kind of the root of it. Yes, you're all from different parts of Earth, but at the end of it, we're all Earthlings. We're all connected in some way. And so if anything, this presentation, some of my work is to kind of remind us of that, and what a cool segue into Earth Day, which is tomorrow. So that is basically it. So I have some outtakes. We did some boxing on here, upside down, jumping around, me almost eating it inside a lava tube. I'm okay. Fixing random things and then being idiots in the engineering bay. If you have any questions about anything, I'm welcome to take questions. This is my contact information. But yeah, if you're, like I said, you're welcome to come up and see the spacesuit. And that is what I have for the presentation. So if anyone has questions.
So you mentioned that stuff broke during the mission, and I'm just curious, is there a way, like, maybe for that mission, when they were preparing it, that they made stuff that they would break on purpose, so you will have to see the team dynamic, how you fix it? They were like basically testing you?
Yeah, absolutely. Some of the things were just because it just broke, but other things they do. They kind of throw in some obstacles to see what's going to happen. And they know the things that are broken, and they purposely don't fix them, to see what happens. Nothing is going to be like life-threatening or anything, but yeah, they absolutely will do that to see what happens. Yeah, and they don't advertise it either.
Okay, hi.
Hi.
I'm wondering from a mental health standpoint, why were all the treats scheduled on one big day, like the call home and the shower and the pancakes? Wouldn't they maybe have evened out people's moods by evening that out?
Yeah.
What's your opinion on that?
Yeah, that's a good question. It's something that I did not have control over the scheduling for that, but it's something that's a fantastic point of being able to do that more often. I think part of it was logistics, because we were limited with the amount of water that we had, so we could only do it right in the middle. It's not something that we can schedule. Maybe future missions, they could spread it out of like, okay, you take a shower here, you take a shower here the next day, that sort of thing. But absolutely, it's a fantastic point, and that would be something that talk about with the commander later on of how do you spread out and what else can you introduce for that. Yeah, good point. Question there.
Yes, so being an extrovert or an introvert help or harm you in this process?
Yeah. I would say everyone is pretty kind of in the middle with it. There weren't really too many extrovert, like more extroverts and not introverts. It was like you had to be, so we had to do 3 psychological tests before being selected to go in there, and you had to score a certain thing in order to be selected. Part of that was like the introversion and extroversion. And do you spend time well on your own? And will you initiate conversation well with other people? So the best way I like to describe it is if you're an introvert, being an outgoing introvert. And you can work well kind of on your own, but being in the proximity of other people. You don't have to be actively conversing, whatever. You just have to be okay with being in the presence of other people.
As I work my way over to here, and I got you back there, was the movie time scheduled as work hours? Because that's a 16-hour day, but if you're watching a movie while you were at work, that's pretty cool.
Yeah, we spread out the movie over like 3 or 4 days, so and then it didn't work. It was Oppenheimer, actually. I know. Yeah.
Hi, I met you at the CFFC meetup at the time.
Awesome, nice.
Yeah. My question is, did they make you use like water filtration to cycle the water from, body fluids and whatnot? Did you have to go through that?
We didn't for for the basic needs type water. We had like a tank of water that was outside that was all drinking water and everything was fine. we did actually have a dehumidifier that was inside the hab that wasn't working, that eventually was working, and then it wasn't working again, and then it was, and then it wasn't. And that's actually top left. It was just dripping water, and what it would do is take out water from, humidity from the hab, whether it's sweat, whether it's just moisture, whatever it was, and turn it into drinking water. So there was actually a filtration system built in for that purpose. We tested it out. That was one of the things that we tested out, and to me, it tasted like what I would imagine drinking fish tank water. I've never drunk fish tank water, so I can't tell. But it had like an algal taste to it or something. But yeah, so yes and no.
Does NASA do physical tests for things like claustrophobia to see if you'll be okay
Yeah.
in a tight space?
Absolutely.
And is it something that's treatable, or is it just a disqualifier?
I would imagine for NASA purposes it would be a disqualifier, although from a therapeutic standpoint, with exposure therapy, and some cognitive behavioral therapy, if it depends on the severity of it. I can't imagine that you would be selected as an astronaut immediately off the bat if you can't put on a helmet and stuff. And in here, it was a definite thing where the claustrophobia, not from myself, but I know from other crewmates had reported that some other crews had wanted to run out of the habitat in the middle of the night in panic. So that was thing. It's no, you don't do that without breaking simulation. It's important to have a therapist on staff so you can, talk to the person and get them through that. But it can work through. Yeah.
Yeah, you guys are asking really good questions. We got a lot coming, so keep them short. Thank you.
I just wondered about the window. Why only one? Because they can put more on the capsules if they wanted to.
That is a fantastic question. On the International Space Station, there is one window. It's the cupola, and that's basically it. And so the point of simulating this would be to simulate what it would be like having one point of looking outside of your spacecraft, so you are there. You're correct, they could add more, but it would be a very different, this is to simulate space. And it would also, if you're on Mars or you're on the moon, that would be different kinds of, for safety and security, you would have to introduce more, stronger windows and different kinds of things. So now it simulates what it's like being in the ISS with the cupola.
And this was built for purpose, right? It wasn't just something that you guys have borrowed from somebody
No.
else to build.
Yeah, no, this was built. These kind of habs are actually built they're meant for severe storms all over the world, and they're very strong. It's wild how strong they are.
After experiencing the menu exhaustion, what was your first meal after returning to Earth?
Tacos. We were gonna go, God, where were we gonna go? We're gonna go to a Hawaiian place. It's I've been to Hawaii for almost a month, and I never got to see Hawaii, so we wanted to go and have local stuff, but no, tacos is what was open. No, it's fantastic, best tacos I've ever had in my life.
You mentioned food exhaustion after
Yeah.
10 days, 2 weeks rather,
Yeah.
and you lost 10 pounds. There are some astronauts who spend as much as a year, or close to a year up there. Do they have a different palate than you, or do they have different food?
They have, their system is a little bit different because they have microgravity. So if they are going to lose weight, it's going to be muscle mass, and some of it will be, nutritional. However, they'll also get a little bit taller because they don't have gravity pushing them down. So astronauts will actually come back to Earth sometimes up to 3 inches taller. Yeah. So we did not. That'd be cool. But ours was, we were restricted with the food we had. NASA has nutritionists and dietary plans for their astronauts to make sure that doesn't happen. Yeah, very closely monitored.
Well, as a mere Earthling, I can only relate to some of your experiences in the habitat, like when I go traveling to a foreign country and come back after 2 weeks. I change a little bit. Did you find afterwards that your inner self had changed, transformed somehow?
Absolutely. It's one of my favorite questions to answer, so thank you. One of the things that seemed to be unanimous within all the crew, and it was something that I noticed as well, was our ability to do more than we ever thought we could. So noticing what glass ceilings I had placed in my own life that I didn't have a choice but to overcome. All right, it's out of convenience, am I too comfortable? So you get really good being comfortable being uncomfortable, and it was like, okay, I didn't think I could do that. I didn't think that I could do the push-up challenge that I did, but it's like, wait, how much am I actually stopping myself from doing this? Because clearly I just did it. So that's like, if I am ever afraid or if I am ever concerned about something, it's like, okay, let me take a step back. What can I actually do that I might be taking myself out of the running without ever giving myself a chance to succeed?
You mentioned the research you were doing was the job satisfaction was plummeting down, going right to 0 by day 30. Are the folks on the ISS having that same issue? Is NASA aware of that? And what do you recommend?
So their setup would be a little bit different. They would be aware of that, right? So this would be, if anything, if you could do anything with the research, it's not like, hey, NASA, look at what I did. It's more of, how do you set an analog astronaut habitat so that that doesn't happen? What do you have to introduce? And that's something that, yes, NASA is absolutely aware of figuring out, preventing burnout and doing, some of these things so that it doesn't happen. Yeah.
What would you do differently on your next missions based on the data that you collected from this one?
Awesome question. So I would actually, when I went, I cast kind of a very wide net of what I wanted to measure. I did, the basic needs assessment. I did a standard intake questionnaire. I did, informed consent, kind of like you would in therapy. I would pull back from a lot of that, still do the informed consent, still do conversations and everything, get to know the crew. But I would focus it more on job satisfaction. From the first one, that's the measure that changed the most. And then I would, in the meantime, doing research as far as, well, what do you do with job satisfaction, with burnout, with exhaustion? So I would fine tune that on another future one. So I would just strictly focus on, preventative measures, on, how do you find measures of exhaustion, of burnout, so that it doesn't get to that point.
More pancakes.
And more pancakes every day.
Angelo and then Doug, and we're done.
Sensational presentation.
Thank you.
Did I hear you say something about taste buds? You made some reference to that.
Yeah, so on the International Space Station in space, because there is no gravity to kind of keep our systems flowing and limbic system flowing and our taste buds, and the pressure is different. There's different distribution of fluids in our body. A lot of the astronauts are congested, and so they'll have kind of like what feels like a head cold when they're in space for a while. And during that time, if you know what it's like to have a cold, how your taste buds are dulled in that time, that's a similar type thing.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
You sure that's not just an excuse for how the food really tastes?
Right, yeah.
So in space, obviously, there's no oxygen, there's no gravity. They're doing research out in space, but here you had a bunch of researchers doing research on Earth on the side of a Hawaiian volcano. So was there research specific to that particular climate or that particular environment, or were they just researching things that, just to test the isolation of people, and it could be done anywhere else?
Yeah. So it depends on the mission, because there have been plenty of studies that have been done because of the geography. So there have been volcanologists, geologists that are on site that have done missions. On my particular mission, there weren't, but there have been, yeah, absolutely. And that's something that, like the microbiologist, he was testing different microbes in the lava tube, on top of the lava tube, in the HAB, and just kind of surveying a bunch of different areas. So it is something that is done. In our particular mission, it wasn't done. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much.